What was the strangest way you've seen someone quit? My boss, in retail, called me into work for noon and was showing me how to check the company email and set alarm codes for the doors, and then gave me the password to his company BlackBerry. This was strange, and then when the regular guy came to start his shift at 1, he closed the store and came out with all his stuff and said, "I'm officially done with this company as of right now." The phone started to ring and I reached to grab it, knowing this was the district manager, and not wanting to confront him, he literally ran out of the store and I haven't seen him since. Apparently, he had just emailed the district manager to say he'd resigned and wanted no further contact. The other guy and me have only worked at the store for a month. Not my story, but my boss's. She worked at a very busy downtown restaurant and brunch spot, and the line would be flooded with tickets for hours on end. One day, one of the line cooks just stopped amidst all of the commotion, stood up straight, paused, grabbed all of the tickets off the line, scrunched them into a ball and put them in his pants. He then put his middle fingers up, rotated to face everyone who was watching in horror, and walked out. This has since become one of my favorite stories. Holy crap, working as a chef in a cafe that can get busy, just the thought of all the tickets being gone horrifies me. I used to work at a fast food place in a small town. We had the run-of-the-mill, so-and-so was arrested, guess he's not working here anymore, happen more times than I could count. But the best was when someone didn't show up for his shift. The manager calls his phone and he doesn't answer. It goes to voicemail. He changed his greeting to the following: "F you, I quit." Talking about co-workers arrested, back in the 80s I was working midnights. We had a co-worker turn to us at shift's end and tell us, "It's been a pleasure working with you. Turn and walk away." When we called after him asking if he'd quit, he said, "Not exactly," and went out the door. We asked the boss what was up and he had no idea. That evening he was on the news for robbing a bank and then being caught minutes later strolling down the street with the money. Turns out he had acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. And back then most treatments were experimental. The company insurance didn't cover treatment, but he had read that people in prison were getting treatment for that disease, so he did what he felt he had to do. That is quite the workaround. I'm not sure that prison inmates were prioritized for that treatment. Correct me if I'm wrong, comments. My high school summer job was at Burger King. One year they put me on the schedule when I was supposed to be at sports camp, 6 hours away, and I said, "No, like I told you 3 months ago, I need those 2 weeks off." And they replied with, "Well, you have to come back to work, then just go back to camp." And I was like, "Okay." So I drove back home and quit. When I got home, there was a manager on the phone for me saying that they have a no quitting policy. I was like, "Okay, well, I quit, so…" followed by awkward silence. Then she hung up on me. We walked a guy we'd fired down to security, and he hugged the old security guard for like 10 minutes in silence. I was once giving a course at a company HQ in a room overlooking the front door. I was just explaining company law for engineers when the entire IT department left the building with their belongings in black plastic bin bags. Since it was IT department, maybe they were outsourced? My first IT job out of college was in a large call center for a large bank. I worked there less than 2 months and wasn't even done with their training program when they took me and the other 15 people that were training with me into a room and said, "We don't need you anymore." So security escorted all of us at once to the door. I had a guy who worked for me who was awesome at his job but believed in just about every conspiracy imaginable. He would go on vacation and people would ask where he was going and he'd say, "Nowhere. I just need more time to work with my magnets." He'd forward all kinds of stuff about big business suppressing technology, crappy internet videos of people who claimed they had built perpetual motion machines, and other things. Sometimes we'd try to point out the flaws in these theories, but mostly we just laughed it off. One morning I came into work and started unpacking my laptop to get started, and he burst into my office with a huge smile and said, "I'm giving ya my 2-week notice." I started to speak and he cut me off. "I double-checked everything last night and I've achieved over-unity. I just needed a different kind of magnet. That was my key. I'm out of here in 2 weeks. I wanted to resign right away, but my girlfriend said that the polite thing to do was give 2 weeks notice. I guess the world could wait another 2 weeks. I tried to talk him down, but he was insistent. Over the next 2 weeks, he continued to work diligently on his remaining tasks, but he had a perpetual smile on his face and declared loudly to anyone who asked that, "I've solved the world's energy problems," and that, "This is a revolutionary game changer." Someone joked that something this radical might put his life in danger, and he responded, "I've taken steps to ensure that if anything happens to me, my invention will still get out to the general public." His last day was almost identical to anyone else's last day at the company they resigned from, only he acted like the happiest person in existence. 3 months later, I got an email from him that was entirely in lowercase letters and looked like it was written by a completely different person. It was something like, "Hi, I was wondering if my position had been filled. If not, I was wondering if I could have it back. There's something wrong with my device. I think it's the magnets, and I don't have enough money right now to fix it. I need a job, thanks." His position had been filled. I tried going through finance to get another position opened because, all crazy aside, he was good at this job. But the vice president of development shot it down when it came to him in the approval chain because he didn't want employees to think they could leave and still have a job to come back to whenever they wanted. This was at a restaurant. The general manager of the place was fired for being a scumbag, pervert, moron. After he was escorted to his car, he drove back to the front of the restaurant, got out, ran to the grassy area and started pulling up handfuls of grass and throwing them at the windows, whilst screaming like a burnt child. I used to manage the tech support side of a call center for an ISP. I had one tech come in and put a 6-pack of beer on my desk and said, "That's that," and walk out crying. Crying? I usually only do that on my way into work. I do it at work, for efficiency's sake. My supervisor used to tell everyone at my last job they were easily replaceable. He was a former military guy and he tried to run the place military style. He'd threaten people, break stuff, and make unreasonable demands. So one day I found a new job and just quit without notice. He got a hold of my number and the next day he called me and yelled at me for being unprofessional. He said I owed him 2 weeks. I told him I'm easily replaceable and he should have no problem finding a replacement, and then I hung up. I should also mention that job had the bare minimum amount of employees to run the place. If someone called out, we'd all have to work at least 2 hours overtime to make up for it. If anyone took a week vacation, it was a nightmare. My quitting like that set the place back a few months until they hired and trained a new guy to replace me. Yeah, there's a difference between a rifle grunt and a specialist. I'm guessing the supervisor was probably in the front-line infantry to have gotten that idea. It's a long story, but our manager wrote up me, my friend, and literally everyone else who had worked that day because she thought someone stole $20 from her. My friend and I decided to quit because I'm not going to sign a write-up when I did nothing wrong and she's too stupid to lock her stuff up. I took the paper, simply wrote "I quit" and handed it back to her. I looked at my friend and he looks right at her, just staring at her. Then he slowly crumples up the write-up, puts it in his mouth and starts chewing, just staring at her. He turns around, walks to his car and drives away, still the whole time with the paper in his mouth. It was glorious. I had a friend who worked as a night baker. One night they wrote him up for being disorderly. They were sitting down at one of the tables in the dining area and they slide him the paper. He threw the paper in the air and shouted, "Nope," and then just went back to baking. They didn't fire him and he didn't quit. I don't know how he got away with it. I ran away after quitting. I was hired by a competing company, put in my 2 weeks, and the boss got suspicious. He came by my desk and told me to follow him into his office to sign a non-competition form, basically saying that after I left there I couldn't work for the competition for 6 months. I was crapping my pants as I got up to follow him. At that exact moment, the phone rang. I picked it up and told him I'd be there in 5 minutes. I finished up the phone call, grabbed my stuff, and hauled it out the back door. They eventually did find out that I went to work for the competition and sent me an email saying, "Congrats on the new job. I'll have to stop by for a visit one of these days." Why would anyone sign something like that? If they didn't make you do it when you were hired, why would you do it when you're about to quit? What are they going to do? Fire you? After you've quit? I don't understand the scenario at all. I worked my way up from someone with no responsibility to running a department. Along the way, no one thought to make me sign one. The main reason I went looking for a new job was because they were doing mass layoffs. After they tried to fire my buddy, they asked him to sign one, which he then informed them was illegal and told them to go F themselves. This happened at the casino my friend worked at. She's standing there dealing blackjack, normal day. All of a sudden, the dealer on the next table over screams, "Blackjack! I win!" while dancing and pumping both fists into the air. His players are dumbfounded. After his victory dance, he reaches out with both hands and scoops up everything on the table. Everything. Yeah, that too. If it was on the table, it got scooped up into his bank. Cards, chips, lighters, all of the money the players had sitting on the table in front of them, even the money that wasn't being wagered. After he scoops it all up, he rips off his ID badge, throws it down on top of the pile and walks off the table, out of the pit, and out the front doors to where his friend was in the car waiting. It took surveillance hours and hours to find out whose money belonged to whom. After the fact, she found out that the guy's friend had been waiting out there since the beginning of his shift. It had taken him hours to deal himself a blackjack. In short, casino employees like to go down in flames. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. Worked at a very fancy French restaurant. The chef was a master chef, and thus he had the biggest ego of anyone I'd ever met. Chef was in the piano bar talking and having a drink with some horse racing bigwigs, Rancho Santa Fe during track season. Hard-working, mild-mannered busser is changing tablecloths. The chef just starts belittling him in front of everyone for a laugh. "What the hell, man? I just saw a bit of the table when you switched cloths." You're not supposed to see the actual table. "If you grabbed the wrong size tablecloth, fold it back up. Man, you're so damn lazy." There are a lot of different sizes, so you grab a variety and use it on the next table if it was wrong. The chef said something else and laughs with the jockey, some hot women and some guys with back pockets thicker than George Costanza. I forget what he said that made everyone laugh, but this 20-year-old behemoth of a busser takes his apron off and throws it at the chef. The chef stands up from the booth like he's teed off and is yelling about how he'll lose his job. The busser goes, "Frick this job and frick you, you little turd," and decks the chef right in the chops in the middle of the busy piano bar, then walks to the back exit, grabs a tray full of buffed Rydell stemware, and chucks it into the wall and leaves. It was pretty rad. A terrible ex-coworker, Crazy K, told everyone except his boss that it was his last day. His boss, a real nice guy, eventually heard what was going on and walked over to him and asked if it were true. Crazy K simply said, "Yep," and stood up and walked out. This guy had serious white snow problems. Not sure where he is now, but I kinda miss the shenanigans, and I hope he's found help. Other stories include continually complaining about being underpaid. He was making 6 figures, which is above average for the position and skill level experience. To illustrate his poorness, he would loudly count coins at his desk by dumping handfuls onto it and sliding them one by one into his hand. This was performed multiple times daily. It was the best for the company, but Crazy K was my primary source of entertainment at work. He would bring girlfriends, very trashy-looking working girls, to our upscale holiday parties. He got 2 of them pregnant, proposed to both, they each took the ring and ran off to southern states and sued him for child support. One of the previously mentioned working ladies at a holiday party was named La Fonda. Yes, seriously. This was about 2 years after Napoleon Dynamite came out and everyone was laughing about it. On a whim, he bought 2 brand new cars in a week, but had to sell them both about a month later. He picked up another lady of the night at a work event using Craigslist on his BlackBerry. Was quite proud of this. I mean, I've had this kind of coworker without the overt wealth. They're very entertaining, if nothing else. I'd planned to quit a job once, and it just didn't take. I picked up a 3rd job at a cafe during undergrad that required me to be in at 6:30 a.m. I thought I could do it. I gave it a try for a few weeks, but it was quickly becoming apparent that I liked drinking and sleeping in on Saturday a whole lot more than the extra cash. Anyway, I woke up hungover in a beautiful girl's bed and decided, screw it, I'm not going in, and went back to bed. I know, I should have called, but I was 20 and working 2 other jobs in addition to taking courses full-time. When I woke up again at around 9, I had a couple of voicemails. I expect "don't bother coming in again, we'll make your last check" message, but instead it's the owners apologizing because my coworker had been attacked and mugged on their way to work, and they figured I must have shown up already, seen the closed cafe and just gone home. I didn't have the heart to tell them, so I went in the next day, worked, and gave notice. 2 managers, one who looked like Ross Perot and the other who looked like John Candy, were leading a meeting when the police came in and arrested them. Turns out they took a trip together to the next town over and beat a working girl nearly to death. Worked in a supermarket as a cashier when I was in high school. A few of my good chums also worked there as well. Cue the crazy lady who goes to my friend who's having a rough day to begin with at the register behind me, puts all of her crap up and he brings her up. She notices a lobster has somehow gone missing and accuses my friend of stealing it. Then he says, "Lady, are you kidding me? Why would I take a lobster?" She then proceeded to yell at him and demands compensation in some form. He's had enough and yells, "F this crap, I'm out. Lady, F you and your lobster." He proceeded to walk out of the store and punches a hole in the wall, knocking a display shelf over as he exits, with her wide-eyed and a silent store behind him. Turns out her lobster was left at the seafood counter. I had to fire an employee after I caught her sleeping in her cubicle multiple times, and then telling me that asking her to assist in other areas when we were slow was not her job. Her mum came in afterwards and came storming into my office in a huff. Picture this: a 40-year-old black woman in pretty good shape in skin-tight leopard leggings with gigantic gold high heels on, oversized sunglasses and cornrows in her hair, screaming at me, "You're just a freaking racist. I'm gonna send my lawyer at you and he's going to sue your butt. We got racial discrimination suit on our hands." I looked at her the whole time and never said a fricking word. After which she stormed out of the building screaming, "You're all a bunch of fricking racist N-words in here." My first job out of college was at a medium-sized company with a small IT staff. There were just 6 of us programmers until we hired the new guy. We were using this obscure language which you couldn't really hire for without paying through the nose, so they decided to do on-the-job training for this. So the new guy was a little older than me but had no experience outside of teaching. He was nice, sort of quiet and a bit quirky. The only personal thing he kept on his desk was this plastic goat. I didn't have anything on my personal desk either, so I didn't really think anything of it. Sometimes he would play with it a little, but it mostly just sat on one spot in his desk. Everyone needs some sort of stress relief, I suppose. A few weeks go by and the new guy seems to be picking up the language fair enough. He had coded a couple of screens, albeit with a little help. One Monday comes up and he doesn't show at the office. Our boss calls him and says you can't just not show up without calling. Not a big deal to me, I mean things come up, it was just a little unprofessional. The next morning I get into the office super early, which is unlike me since I'm such a late riser. He rolls in around his normal time and is surprised to see me, but I figure it's because he likes the quiet morning. We're there working for a couple of hours and the whole time he's fiddling with the goat in his hand. Mid-morning he gets up out of his chair and leaves our little room. An hour goes by and I figure out he isn't around for lunch, which we all used to do as a group. I figure he must have had something to do. Well, he doesn't show up after lunch. The next day, no call, no show. A weekend passes and still he doesn't show and he hadn't returned any calls. So my boss had to call the police to do a health check on him. He literally sends an email saying he wouldn't be back. We all look at each other thinking, who in the world quits like that? Was this a spur of the moment or premeditated thing? We look at his desk and realize his little plastic goat is gone. He must have come in that morning to grab it, but was surprised by me into staying for a bit to cover it up or something. He hadn't done anything malicious to the code, he just wanted his goat. A guy I knew got an email for a meeting in the boss's office. Figuring he was screwed, he starts just destroying computer equipment, just messing stuff up like crazy. So he goes into the office, sits down, and the boss tells him he needs to go to a conference someplace and it'd be all paid for by the company. He didn't get to go to the conference. My previous company was so awful that we'd get new employees sometimes that would get the vibe very quickly and quit within the first few days. But the classic was the guy who never came back from his lunch break on the first day. Within his group in our company, his name, Greg, became a verb meaning to quit at lunch and never come back. So occasionally you'd hear a frustrated employee saying, "That's it, I'm doing a Greg." I wonder if my name is used for its infamy to imply any activity in a circle I'm unaware of. I just kind of love that Greg probably has no idea that he left such a legacy in a workplace he didn't even spend a full day in. I have 2 stories, one normal and the other not so normal. The first was a bus guy at Red Lobster that had had enough on a Friday night. He was in the middle of cleaning a table. Nobody was talking to him, nobody was yelling, and nobody had had any confrontation with him all night. Suddenly, he stood up and yelled, "F this place," took off his apron, threw it across the room, and walked out the door. Never saw him again. The weird one was a guy at a place I worked where we had unlimited internet access. A lot of people would Facebook or whatever. Turns out this guy was trolling chat rooms for underage girls. He left for lunch to meet one at a mall, and it wasn't a young girl but a bunch of cops. They took him and then came and took the computer he worked on. My ex-girlfriend used to be a pizza delivery driver for the chain pizzeria. One day her boss was giving her guff and she said she quit. The manager said she needed to bring her uniform in. She promptly took off her shirt, threw it at him, she was wearing underclothes, and then walked out, through a restaurant full of families and customers. I worked at a bowling alley and me and another guy did all the legwork for the bar, bringing out the food, collecting bear cups, delivering the beer, among other things. The old lady bartender never split a dime with us. She hoarded all of the tips despite only filling the cups. We didn't like it, so I mentioned it to the manager girl on duty. She wasn't a very good manager and couldn't handle situations. Her big solution was, "If you don't like it, take off your shirt." So without really batting an eye, I took off my shirt, put it on the table, and walked out. A few days later, the person above her called me in to apologize, give me my last paycheck, and offered to let me stick around. I didn't, but as a nice consolation, I learned they started paying the other guy doing the same work a little extra, and he started making a portion of the tips. Screw that greedy old banshee, though. After 25 years as an executive with a fairly large corporation, I threw the keys to my company car and my company credit card on the CEO's desk and walked home. Started my own business 4 months later and just retired after 19 successful and blissful years. My friend quit his job at a corner store by just walking out and never coming back. Before he left, he stashed an open gallon of milk on top of the radiator that hung from the ceiling. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.